Hey, thanks for joining us for the Hemi-Sync podcast. Our guest today is Russ Hudson. Over the last 3 decades, Russ has established himself as one of the top teachers and developers of the Enneagram personality typology in the world today. He's been writing and teaching full-time with the Enneagram Institute, as well as on his own since 1991, and has co-authored with Don Richard Riso 5 best-selling books on the subject, including The Wisdom of the Enneagram and Personality Types. These books are widely considered to be not only groundbreaking contributions in the field of Enneagram studies, but also important contributions to the literature of psychological type and have been translated into French, German, Italian, Spanish, and many others, with more on the way. They are the best-selling Enneagram books in their respective countries. Russ worked with Don Riso for several years to develop a scientifically validated test instrument, the Riso-Hudson Enneagram Type Indicator, or RHETI, now considered a standard test in the Enneagram field. The RHETI has been used by Fortune 500 companies, including Amoco, AT&T, DuPont, Motorola, General Motors, Prudential Insurance, and Sony. Actively involved in the Enneagram community, Russ is the founder and president of Russ Hudson Consulting and is the co-founder of the Enneagram Institute, as well as a founding director and former vice president of the International Enneagram Association, a global organization advancing knowledge of the subject. He holds a degree in East Asian Studies from Columbia University in New York, from which he graduated Phi Beta Kappa. Here is Russ Hudson. So Russ, thanks for joining us. We're having this conversation at a time when the Enneagram has really entered popular consciousness, kind of mainly as a life hacking tool for strivers and professional types. And I'm just curious, what's it like for you as a person who has spent 30 years studying this, teaching it, writing about it, and kind of all its various depths and facets to see this happening?
Well, it's surprising, that's for sure. And actually I've been teaching it 30 years. I've been studying it for between 40 and 50. So a long time. But when I first was doing it many years ago, I was working with Don Richard Riso. I met him after he wrote his first book, Personality Types. And, people would ask me what I do for a living, and it was very difficult to answer that question in any kind of a soundbite. Because no one had heard of this. But nowadays, I can just say, I teach the Enneagram. Oh, yeah, that's that typing, that's that test thing or whatever their perception is.
Yeah.
But it's been amazing to see how quickly it's been spreading these days. We used to say over and over, I think the Enneagram might break out this year. But the last few years, it really did.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost turned into kind of like a Myers-Briggs type, personality type thing. But it goes so much deeper than that.
Right.
And so first, what would you ascribe this newfound popularity to? Is there any one thing you can point at?
Well, I think some of it is it's just been around a long time. It's long enough for it to have some credibility and legs. Like if it was a fly-by-night thing, it probably would have vanished, would have peaked and left. But it just keeps growing. I think that's part of it. Part of it is it's become very popular with coaches, life coaches, professional coaches. It's really helpful for people in the coaching profession. But also, I think the other big factor was people in mainstream religions started to discover it. So here in North America, for example, there's a lot of Christians, evangelicals even, who have discovered it, that it's very helpful. And I teach over in the Middle East, and many kind of more contemporary people living in the Muslim world also are really embracing it and finding it very helpful. So I think it's just a critical mass thing, perhaps, because it's in a number of different markets these days. A lot of people are finding out about it.
That's interesting. I was actually not aware of religious folks kind of adopting this. Kind of previously, it sort of reminded me of the trend in, quote unquote, mindfulness practice, where secular types, corporate types, performance types have sort of co-opted meditation and I guess really sort of Vipassana practice to make it into like a productivity tool.
Yeah.
So what are your general feelings about that? Do you think that the increased notoriety helps or does it present certain problems as well?
Well, as you're saying, Garrett, it's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? On the one hand, I think as it goes out in those ways where it's being framed in a more practical way, where some of the deeper elements of it aren't exactly front and center, I think it's helping people who are primed or maybe ready in their life for a deeper dive to go, hey, wait a minute, there's something more to this. And I would say the same about mindfulness. I mean, it's, I almost don't use that term anymore because it has been so co-opted and a lot of people don't quite understand it. I don't think you can go to a 3-hour presentation in a corporation and figure out what mindfulness is.
Right.
But it's a long journey to discover what mindfulness is. Nonetheless, some of the people in those corporate programs are going to get touched by it. We're all human beings. And as such, they're going to say, hey, there's something more to this. And they're going to want to go on to the next level. And so from that point of view, I think it's okay. And it's sort of inevitable, don't you think? That's just human nature. Mr. Gurdjieff, the guy who we'll talk about, who originally brought the Enneagram, used to say, there are always those who will steal crumbs from the table. Meaning people will just take little dribs and drabs of a teaching that they can make some with and they run with it.
Gurdjieff had a bunch of great quotes. I think one of my favorites is man loves his sleep.
Yes. And his suffering.
And his suffering. Yeah. So we'll get more into that too. So so now that we've touched upon Gurdjieff, can you tell us a little bit about where we think the Enneagram comes from?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's kind of complicated because it isn't from one source. The modern Enneagram movement, such as it is sort of an amalgam, a synthesis of several different streams. Now, in great antiquity, they may have been more integrated than they were for a long time. But one element of it is the symbol, which has a tremendous pedigree and is based in various ideas from the Western spiritual Hermetic tradition. But the typology is another stream. And it was Gurdjieff who brought the symbol into the awareness of the modern world, along with some of the deeper ideas behind it, the idea of the centers, the idea of presence, the idea of the transformation of the human psyche along certain lines, the whole basic core and raison d'etre of the Enneagram. However, the typology was not anything Gurdjieff was really teaching. He did have a type system, but he didn't connect it with the Enneagram symbol. So that was Oscar Ichazo, who brought that forth a bit later and was the one who really looked at how these different perspectives, patterns, type perspectives sit around that symbol and how they relate to one another.
Thanks for that. And so can we talk a bit about just some of the various basic concepts behind the Enneagram in terms of the types, the personalities, the structures, ego deficiency, and kind of how it sets up the 9 types?
Sure. Well, basically the premise behind the Enneagram, which is pretty fundamental in any real spiritual tradition, is that human beings have layers. We have outermost layers, we have innermost layers. And in our outer layers, we are run by what in this work is called personality, or we might say nowadays ego. Our ego patterns, which are largely programmed, imprinted in us, acquired through our families, through our culture, through our history, through school, all kinds of things. Stuff we do to be cool, stuff, all of that, and that's a lot of human life. But there's a deeper part to humanity that the Enneagram speaks to, which in this work we call essence. And essence is based in what in psychology we would call temperament, that we're born endowed with certain characteristics, certain tendencies, certain capacities and gifts too. So in the traditions behind this, the idea was to sort of liberate that essential nature from its the ways it's obscured by
Yeah.
the problems of personality, so
Right.
that our gifts can more freely flow in the world. So that's the whole basic thrust of it. And however, sometimes, as you were pointing out, in the way it's talked about in modern times, people don't even mention the essential part of it. It's just,
Right.
here's the different kinds of personalities, and great.
Right.
Where do you go with that?
Right. And so that is kind of like the pop culture approach to this. So like, here are the
Yes.
personality types. Here's how you hack it or work with it.
Right.
But really, you're saying the personality types are covering up something more essential, that is really kind of our true nature, our true talent, our true ability.
Yes, that's right.
And so is it worth maybe talking about some of the personality types now, so folks can maybe get a sense for what we're talking about in more concrete fashion, and maybe even recognize themselves in some of what we're reviewing here?
Yes. Well, sure. There's different sequences, orders you can go in, but I historically have started with 0.8 and go around the circle of the Enneagram. Other people do it different ways, but just looking at them, each of them begins with a gift, and then as we develop an ego pattern, our direct experience of that gift diminishes, and it turns into some kind of reactive pattern. And so, starting with 0.8, and the reason I start with 0.8 is instead of 0.1 is the 8, 9, and 1. All three of them refer to body intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence, gut intelligence, and the possibilities and distortions of that. So 8 is about how, when we're more present, we feel more alive. We feel more vivid. We feel more confident, empowered, like we can take our place in the world. We have a voice. And so that's beautiful. That's part of the gift of it. It gives us natural leadership capacities, a lot of really great stuff. But as we lose the sense of that, the direct experience of it, as we lose presence and awareness, lose mindfulness, so to speak, and get caught in our personality, it turns into trying to control everything, trying to be the boss of everything, trying to also sort of armor ourselves, because without that confidence, we feel like life is going to come get us. And so we better have some good walls up. And so that's 0.8. And so, approximately a ninth of human beings, that will be their main thing. It doesn't mean they're only that. And that's an important thing to say. And we don't learn this so we can just go around acting like our type. We learn it so that we can see the box we've unwittingly put ourselves in, and how to open to a broader range of human capacities.
Right. So that's a great point. So people tend to have one type that predominates, but most folks are working more than one type.
Yeah, it's just common sense, really. But one of them is like the root of your ego ecosystem. It's what's running the show more than anything else. And it doesn't mean that, again, the other stuff isn't there. But if you can find the root, it's a much quicker road to liberation and inner freedom than messing around with the details forever and ever.
Right. Cool. So should we move around the Enneagram to maybe a different corner and give people a different flavor for some different types? Sure.
Where would you like to go?
Well, let's see. So I emanate, so that kind of vibed with me. Maybe like maybe like a 2.
Sure. 2s was good contrast. Good pick.
Yeah.
2 is we're sliding around the bend here, and 2, 3, and 4 all have to do with the capacities of the heart. And doesn't mean they're more heartful necessarily, but it means their gifts are more naturally related to the heart. And it also means that their troubles, their difficulties are around these ego structures that arise around heart issues. So the 2 is the part of us that when we're present, we feel heartfully connected with everyone. Like if I'm with you, I feel connected on a heart level. There's this beautiful sense of boundaries relaxing. We feel more loved. We feel more loving. We feel more of the warmth of reality. And, of course, we might feel that with a friend, with a loved one. We can feel this with an animal. It's like our cute dog comes and is looking at us because we're having a bad day. We just feel that connection. But you can have this even on your own. You could be out in the middle of the woods or on a mountaintop or on the beach or something.
Mhm.
And just, it's the feeling that presence, reality has a loving and holding quality to it. It
Mm.
helps us relax. Like we're not going to really let down our guard very much if we don't feel there's something benevolent in our presence. And that's what two brings, this kind of kind, loving kindness,
Uh-huh.
heart connecting quality, which
That
is,
sounds great.
yeah,
So,
who doesn't like that,
yeah.
right?
So,
And that's the gift of two.
yeah.
Now, the problem is when we lose presence, we lose the sense that that's around or available. So
Mhm.
the little two ego says, well, darn, I'm going to have to take over that job
Yep.
and make sure everybody gets loved, everybody gets cared for, all needs are attended to. And then I become kind of codependent, actually, where I'm always taking care of everybody else except who? Me.
Mm.
And I become caught in a pattern of thinking it's my job to make sure everybody's okay while neglecting myself. Now, of course, if you do that long enough, you might have some underlying resentments,
Yeah.
difficult feelings about that. They have to get stuffed down so you can be a kind and loving person all the time. But there's a whole journey in each of these of going back to where we left, where we essentially abandoned ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Right. So twos tend to be very generous with themselves, with their time, with their feelings, and including their bodies. So like, I think it's funny to like kind of put this in like real world terms. So like groupies often tend to be twos, right?
Well, that's one type that could be that. They could be all sorts of things. And there's different complexities to the Enneagram, we don't really have time to get into, but it can be channeled through three different kind of instinctual drives of self-preservation. Let me take care of your physical needs, make you fed, your sexual needs, and then you've got groupie, or your social needs. Let me talk to the boss on your behalf.
Right. So let's go back to the boss. So type 8 was the boss, and this is a good opportunity to talk about mistyping as well. So lots of folks who think they're 8s are actually 6s, right? So let's talk about 6s.
Yeah, it's interesting because you see people try to type by traits.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm a boss, I'm a leader, therefore I must be 8. No, they're leaders of all 9 types. More US presidents have been 0.9 than any other type.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And so, and we might think the 4s, they're the creative type, so it must be a 4. No, all 9 types can be creative. All 9 points have creativity in them. 6s are interesting because they often look like a lot of other types, and 6s are often the last one to figure out I'm a 6 is me. Like everybody has my number, but I'm because when 6 is about the head center, and 6 is about the capacity to recognize what's actually here now, what's taking place in and around me, to meet all that with awareness. I mean, 6 is really the mindfulness type. 6 is about the natural capacity to pay attention, to be aware of things, to be on top of what's happening and to attend to what's happening. Something needs my attention, I'm on it. That needs my attention, I'm on it. Now, that's a beautiful capacity, and where would we humans be without it? And sometimes that entails taking leadership positions. Somebody has to step up to the plate here. I don't really want to, but I will. However, when we lose that direct capacity, the feeling of having to deal with everything comes along with a feeling of overwhelm. Like reality's coming at me and I'm having to deal with it all the time. So it produces an underlying affect of anxiety of I'm the only one who's just trying to keep all the holes in the dike plugged. I'm trying to keep everything afloat, and I'm stressed and I'm overworked. And I tend to try to deal with problems by thinking about them. Like, what could go wrong with my job? What could go wrong with my marriage? What could go wrong with this country, etc. And so I'm thinking about that so that if any of that happens, I can deal with it. But the net effect is that my mind is filled with problems. And it feels like my life is nothing but a bunch of difficulties, when in fact it may be, by any normal human standards, going just fine, but it doesn't feel that way to me. So there's that it's the way we just live in this very stressed out way.
Gotcha. Interesting. Good. So let's talk a bit about the way out. Like, how do we use the Enneagram to transform?
Well, that is very interesting. And there are, different questions.
Mm.
The Enneagram was originally a tool of self-awareness for people who were in contemplative practices. The typology had its roots in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
It was not originally coming from Sufis necessarily, but much earlier.
Mm.
And one of the sources was early Christian monasticism, where they were looking at what caused us to disconnect from presence, or in their terminology, to forget the presence of God, in the more religious and spiritual language. But so the Enneagram begins with self-observation based in some presence, meaning some kinesthetic awareness. I'm sensing myself. I'm aware of my breath. Some emotional intelligence, meaning I'm meeting whatever happens with patience, kindness, some degree of holding, and mental mindfulness or awareness, in that I'm not forming an opinion about it. I'm curious. I'm interested. I'm curious. What is this? Why am I thinking that? Why do I do it that way? But again, that curiosity works when it's connected with the heart and the body. When you bring all that together, first thing is you observe the pattern. This pattern keeps coming up again and again and again. That's why people trying to find their type and they're just reading some description. Well, I like Jeeps, therefore I must be a this. No, that's not where you're going to find it. It's in observing these deeper patterns that usually run a little bit beneath the level of our normal awareness. But once you see that and you become aware of that pattern, you become aware of deeper emotions, difficulties that are related to the perceived loss of essence. That how I lost my soul. There's a sense that goes back to very early in our childhood of being disconnected from, in a sense, the best part of us. And there are various psychological patterns that come up, but mostly you run into a kind of a headwind of emotional, challenging emotions. I'll put it that way. And as you go through that, even to a kind of inner emptiness, a kind of stillness, but through that stillness, we rediscover the qualities that we thought were lost. And it's not a one-shot deal. It's something you go back and forth on, hundreds, if not thousands of times. But gradually, there's like a shift in the balance where we don't exactly get rid of the personality, but the personality takes its proper place and our essence is more liberated to be where we live our lives from.
That's a great way to put it. So I think a lot of people who have concepts of enlightenment or realization think of the ego or the personality as something that they're going to get rid of.
Right.
And that's not what happens, is it?
I've been in this again way too long. Watch various, gurus proclaiming that they're beyond ego. And then you have to ask, who is the one that's beyond the ego? Right? What does that even mean? There's some good parts to ego. Like, we acquire language and culture from our civilization. I don't want to have to learn to speak English all over again. There's elements, but it's more what happens actually is not so much that we get rid of ego, but our sense of identity shifts away from it. Ego is just stuff that happens in our mind. It's just activities in our emotions, our mind, our postures, and our body, and they get loosened up and freed. But it's more that the seat of our identity, what we're saying I to, shifts out of those patterns and into something deeper. That's what I would.
Beautiful. So one thing that I was curious about that you mentioned earlier is you talked about the types of the presidents. Like, how were the presidents typed?
Well, we're just taking guesses. We're taking stabs. Okay. But when you read the writings of these people, you look at how they lived. It's kind of clear that LBJ was probably not a 2.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
It's probably not. You can
limit it, right?
to a few things, and yeah, he was probably an 8.
An 8,
but
yeah.
there are just his mannerisms, his writings, his thinking, and you can, if you study the life of a person, to look at the trajectory of their growth or their downfall.
Yeah.
There's often a story in there. The themes of the rising and falling of our consciousness in relation to the gifts of our type are the stuff of myth, of storytelling, of a lot of people in Hollywood, screenwriters and actors and directors, are using the Enneagram to create more believable and helpful story arcs.
That's very interesting. So as you go back to kind of the type 9 and the presidents, is there anything about type 9 that you think lends itself to becoming president or a person of that stature?
Yeah. 9s have a capacity to project goodwill, and they also are known for not playing favorites so easily. They're fair. They can hear both sides of an argument and give everybody a fair shake. Don Riso, my writing partner for many years, passed away. Gee whiz, almost 10 years ago next week. He called the 9 the peacemaker, using the name from the Beatitudes. But Helen Palmer called this point the mediator, similar idea. And I think it's that. Thus, people trust that this person's not going to rip me off. So if you're looking for someone to run an organization or a government agency or a country,
right?
9s have a way of winning trust.
Yeah.
People think that they're down to earth, sensible, and essentially fair, kind people. So people put their trust in them.
Interesting that doesn't always happen, though.
No, it doesn't always happen. It's that perception.
Yeah. Very interesting. Cool. So you've got a course coming up. It's a 9-month course called Keys to the Enneagram series, which you're offering kind of through Diamond Approach. Can you tell us a little bit about how all of what we've talked about today relates to that?
Sure. Well, just a little personal history. I started off in my journey in the Gurdjieff work. And so I was studying under people who lived with Gurdjieff. It was not speculation. So I got the kind of direct transmission of that. But at a certain point, that teaching ran its course with me. I'd been in it for 15 years. And then I met Almas, whose actual name is Hamid Ali. And I sort of realized that he was working along similar lines to what I wanted to be doing. And outside of the Enneagram, he was presenting an approach to inner work that was utterly congruent to what Don Riso and I had come to as the necessary journey, let's say, for the transformation of the types. So in this course, I'll be working with my friend and colleague, Sandra Maitri, who is a teacher within the Diamond Heart School, but is also really one of the great Enneagram experts in the world at this point.
Yes, she is.
And I would say that she and I are known for two of the go-to people if you want to know about the deeper spirituality behind the system. And so we've known each other and had conversations and been very friendly for a long time. And so now through the school, we're going to be doing this 9-month course on what we talked about a little bit here. You found out your point. Good. What? How does that knowledge become a transformational vehicle for you? And that's what we're going to be focusing on, using some of the tools and methodology of the Diamond Heart School, and with me bringing in a little bit from my Gurdjieff background too. And then we get to play and see what happens. I'm very excited about it. I think it's the first time Sandra and I have really had a chance to do a teaching together, and we're both delighted to be able to do it.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. So I was in a group that was led by Sandra for many years. Just kind of my own personal plug here. I mean, you, Russ Hudson, Sandra Maitri, and Hamid Ali, like to me, are the 3 greatest living experts on the Enneagram. So if folks want to really learn more about this and get deep into it, this is a golden opportunity. So that course starts September 10th, right?
Yes,
Awesome.
Do believe so.
Awesome. Well, anything else you'd like to leave folks with? Any parting thoughts?
Well, just to say that if you found the Enneagram, amazing, good. don't get so hung up on just being a type.
Yeah.
That's a starting point. That's the entryway into the system. But if you really want to take the full ride, you might come join us for this course. But remember that it's showing you what you take yourself to be, not who or what you actually are, which is, generally speaking, a mystery beyond easy classification.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish you all a gorgeous journey in discovering more and more about that mystery of who and what you are.
Beautiful. Thank you, Russ. So folks, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like, share it up. You can also leave a comment depending on the platform, and we'll try to respond. You can find Russ at russhudson.com. And you're also connected with the Enneagram Institute, which where you're president emeritus. Thank you so much for joining us, Russ.
Thank you, Garrett. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Likewise.